A frame of film is often more than just the sum of the objects within it.
It presents a world unto itself, bordered by the absence of light from your television screen, monitor, or projector. And yet this restricted window can be broadened so that we may witness an entire battlefield, or even an entire universe. Or it can narrow its focus so that you may only see a single person's face. Cinematography, the art of deciding what is in the frame and where the frame is in relation to the world, is one of the most important aspects in the language of film. Through nothing but images and the use of judicious editing, a story can be told without any utterance of dialogue or any kind of preamble. A close-up of a character's eyes can infer focus or segue into their thoughts. Further, a close-up of a character in pain can elicit sympathy from the audience, giving a face that they can identify as being in distress. However, pulling the camera back can contextualize this character's pain, placing him and his situation in exactly the position needed to solidify what the story demands. We are being told what is going on without being told what is going on.
Further, cinematography can be informed by the theme of the story it's trying to tell, and even the emotions that the characters are experiencing.
In Silence of the Lambs, our main character Clarice Starling encounters Hannibal Lecter, who I believe needs no introduction. The actress, Jodie Foster, portrays Clarice as being slightly frightened and in awe of Hannibal's presence. But how do we feel when we see Hannibal through her eyes? Well, we feel tense and on edge, as the camera is as close to Anthony Hopkins' face as possible, set dead center so that we cannot focus on anything else. Much like the film's ongoing theme of confinement, confined by gender relations in a work environment, confined by a body that doesn't fit the identity it was assigned, or even a literal physical confinement of a jail cell. We as viewers are visually confined on the frightening visage of Hannibal Lecter peering into us and figuring out our every machination.
This is part of the reason why I am not center frame in the video that you are watching right now. Usually when someone is in center frame, it's for reasons for rigidity or rules, like a photo ID or a lineup or something like that. People don't have conversations like that. So to make the show feel more casual and conversational, I set the camera off-center just a tiny bit. That way, it feels a little bit more natural, and plus, my row of DVDs can form a nice sight line that directs the viewer's eye towards my face.
The use of placement and movement can be used for more than just unease or casual conversation. The way a film is shot can run the gamut on the spectrum of human emotion, from sheer terror to hypnotic trance. Whatever the story may call for, a well-placed shot may mean the difference between pegging down the intended feeling or not.
Animation works under the very same principle that live action does in regards to cinematography, but animation also works in a different, and some might say more difficult, dimension.
The trade-off with live action is that animation is less hampered by the chaos of your typical shoot. There are a million things that can thwart or otherwise change the intended outcome of a live-action film. An actor can have a different interpretation, or he might be unable to perform the scene as it was originally thought out. Locations can be closed and lost on a whim of fate or accident. Props can fail. Makeup and hair has to be redone several times a day, burning precious hours on a tight deadline, etc. Whereas with animation, everything that appears in frame is in direct control of the people that are creating it. It's a more raw and creative medium for a story to work with, as there is literally no limitation other than production budget.
This means, however, that with all of this creative control, you actually have to create it.
The effects that we take for granted in a live-action film has to be meticulously recreated in an animated film. What kind of effects?
Well, let me ask you this. Why is it, when you're watching a cartoon on television, the camera rarely moves? Well, it's because when you move a camera, you change perspective, and that changes everything within the frame.
In live action, moving the camera is no big deal. The visual effects of parallax and proportion are naturally made with the viewer's eye. In animation, the complex process of replicating the natural phenomena of motion blur, focus, displacement, and other visual alterations have to be done by hand with exceptional, clever ingenuity.
Which is why I want to take a hard, incisive look at one of the finest examples of the many facets of cinematography and animation, Memories, a compendium of 3 short films based on the works of Katsuhiro Otomo. You know, the Akira guy.
Released in 1995, Memories has the rare distinction of having a major US release under Columbia Pictures, part of a handful of anime that include Metropolis, Cyborg 009, and Cowboy Bebop the movie.
It also never got an English dub, so yes, once again, I'm breaking one of my rules. But you know what? Fuck it.
As individual short films, the three stories, Magnetic Rose, Stink Bomb, and Cannon Fodder, have little to do with each other. There are no recurring characters, their settings are completely different, there isn't even a connecting theme or idea between them. In fact, the namesake of the compilation, Memories, really only applies to Magnetic Rose, but we'll get to that in a bit. They do, however, share a very technical and inspired approach to their visuals. Right off the bat, you could tell that you are looking at some of the most resplendent and fluid animation that Japan has ever produced. To say nothing of how smooth the characters move, it's even more impressive when you consider that all three films have wildly varying art styles. The more realistic tones of Magnetic Rose, the exaggerated caricatures of Stink Bomb, the dirty, almost grimy etchings of Cannon Fodder cannot be mistaken for each other, and yet all three feel like they were made by the same hand.
Each short film had its own challenges when it comes to animating and directing, and if you know anything about traditional animation, you will be blown away by what they managed to accomplish.
In Magnetic Rose, the story takes place in deep space.
And there you are.
You know how everyone and their mother was talking about how gravity was so impressive because they managed to capture the feeling of being weightless in space on a soundstage? Well, imagine trying to do the exact same thing by drawing it. Not only that, because there's no gravity and thus no up or down, this can make direction even more convoluted and harder for the viewer to follow. For instance, in this scene, we can see that two men are sitting at their console boards in their ship, but one seems to be sitting on a chair on the ceiling. This presents a number of nightmares as far as keeping perspective and scene geometry cohesive, and yet they still pull it off wonderfully.
Stink Bomb, the second short film, had its own set of hurdles that the animators had to contend with. That of human movement in a massive context.
The story follows a hapless salaryman as he inadvertently takes a pill that turns him into an unknowing human bomb, emitting a noxious gas that kills everything that has the misfortune of breathing it. Clueless to his fate, he runs to try and find some people to help and explain what is going on, and to return a lost briefcase. But mass evacuation and panic has gripped nearly everyone.
Now, with this kind of setup in mind, what do you think is an appropriate scene to convey the intended mood? Well, a scene of a lot of people running away in panic, right? Well...
One of the very first things that animators learn to do is to animate a walk cycle. Why? Because more often than not, they will be tasked to animate human beings, or at least humanoid-like creatures, and one of the most common yet intricate actions that they will do is walk.
Tell me, how do you walk? You put one foot in front of the other, right? Well, that's part of it.
You do swing your foot forward, but what about your other foot? What about your arms? Why does it seem like when you walk, you bob up and down? The science of human locomotion is a study of physiology and physics. To walk means to propel yourself forward, and catching your forward momentum by your outstretched foot. Your arms provide a pendulous counterbalance that allows you to shift your center of gravity further than you normally could, which is why you're more comfortable swinging the opposite arm to your outstretched foot, and why you can walk quicker swinging your arms. In a sense, when you are walking, you are in the process of repeatedly falling and catching yourself, thus the bobbing movement.
Now, try to take everything that I just told you, apply it to a human being stumbling over himself because he is running away for dear life 40 times over. Now, also try to apply perspective and distance, and the most difficult of all, parallax.
Quick sidebar, parallax is the visual phenomena of objects moving at varying distances according to the distance from which it is viewed at. You know how when you're walking down the street and it seems like the closer objects are, the faster they move by you? That's parallax, and trying to recreate this phenomena is a Herculean task to get right for traditional animation. But the results speak for themselves. More than any of the other short films, Stink Bomb pays special attention to human movement, both the violent and ungraceful, and the benign and common. The frame is filled with people living their lives, often in the background, and not given any focal point for audience attention. But they're there for an important reason: to breathe reality into the story. About a guy who turns himself into a living gas weapon by that splitting hairs.
Finally, there's Cannon Fodder, the most visually distinctive of the three short films, and not just because of its art direction.
It's hard to convey this because I'm editing around the film, but the entire story is shown without a single cut. Sure, there are visual transitions that serve as an edit between scenes, but the notion of having every single frame told in movement is a technical achievement in the world of animating.
Remember, every time the camera moves, the setting, the characters, the props, and everything within the frame has to move with it. So, a scene like this? Had to be drawn like this.
To animate a rotating shot that established the entire room in which the scene took place, the animators had to draw what amounts to an entire wall mural to film this. And what you're seeing here doesn't even include all the assets that were used to make the shot.
Still, I don't want to make it sound like Memories is the Thief and the Cobbler done right. There is an additional tool that was used to help make all of these short films. CG.
Yes, there is CG in all three short films, but if you didn't know better, you probably wouldn't have noticed, which is the best use of CG no matter if it's animation or not. The problem with CG in anime has always been the fact that it has never been seamless. CG characters always stand out and draw unneeded attention towards themselves, same thing with mechs and vehicles. Memories, on the other hand, uses CG not to replace objects, but to help animate the details that the layman wouldn't notice, like panning the camera through a hallway or having a ship fly through floating debris in space. Even with the advent of a multi-plane camera, it was still limited by the amount of physical space available. With CG, no such limit exists.
I hope by now I've imparted upon you all just even the slightest fraction of the amount of work and artistry that went into animating the most beautifully made anime I have ever seen. Still, something feels missing, doesn't it?
I've spent all this time talking about how and what went into what Memories shows you, that I haven't really talked about the stories themselves.
And, well, there's a sad reason for that.
最終研究はね、ノリだと思ってるんですよね。その頭の入り方からこれもやっぱり、駆け抜けていく話なんで、変な話なんでねこれ。一日の少年が起きてから寝るまでの話非常にあまりこれもね意味を考えずにですね、世界に浸っていただければいいかなっていうそんな感じですかね。
Stink Bomb is a wild ride, but I basically summed up the entire story when I spoke about the premise. It leads to a joke ending and it quickly escorts itself out. Cannon Fodder, meanwhile, has no plot to speak of, but rather centers around a day in the life of a city that routinely fires cannon rounds at an unknown enemy. The film briefly brings up this fact in dialogue, but doesn't do much with it.
ねえお父さん、さ、一体お父さんたちってどこと戦争してるの？
そんなことは大人になればわかる。寝なさい。
はーい。
The brainchild of Memories, Katsuhiro Otomo, never really paid any hard mind to his short stories as actual stories. He regarded the short films as experiences, which isn't a bad way of looking at filmmaking, but it neglects an integral part of it.
Otomo often takes this approach to directing, to the point where it feels less like a style choice and almost like a defense. Like, he's on his back foot when he's explaining his work. And it makes sense when you realize he began as an artist. How many artists do you know who are unconditionally confident in their work?
That he focuses mainly on the visual aspect of film and the feelings that they can convey to an audience is certainly not a bad thing by any means, but to see all of this dedicated work and craft be in service to just spectacle feels wrong-headed.
Thankfully, the director and screenwriter Koji Morimoto thought the same way, and when he was given the chance to direct Magnetic Rose, he took it upon himself, along with collaborator Satoshi Kon, to retool the script. He even managed to get Yoko Kanno to record new tracks to be used for the short, having worked with her previously on Macross Plus. You know, the greatest OVA ever made.
That's right, a director who loves to marry rich imagery and music teams up with a composer that makes nothing but rich music on a Satoshi Kon pen script to create what is, and I am making no exaggeration when I make this claim, the greatest anime of all time. Fuck y'all motherfuckers if you don't agree with me, except if you do, then we cool.
But to explain exactly why I feel this way means having to go into deeper detail with Magnetic Rose, and that means having to spoil pretty much everything. Sorry about this, folks. I don't mean to interrupt the review, but I feel that right now I should be off script and coming to you as me, not as the exaggerated sage persona. Like, you know, just so you all know where I'm coming from. I have a lot of strong feelings towards Magnetic Rose, and these are feelings that I feel need to be expressed in my best ability to do so. But that means, like I said, going into spoiler territory, which means that I'm doing the film a disservice in a lot of ways, because the best way to experience Magnetic Rose is to go into it completely blind, not knowing what's going to happen, as is the case for a lot of films. So, if you haven't seen it, but you have the slightest inkling to do so, I'm here to say, stop this review right now, go out and watch at least Magnetic Rose, then come back to this review. But if you don't care about spoilers or still have no plans on seeing Magnetic Rose, well, then let's continue the review. We set off with a team of space salvagers mining derelict satellites for useful tech. Right from the opening credits. This film is beautiful from the word go! In fact, the animation is so fantastically mesmerizing that you feel cheated that you have to keep your eyes trained at the bottom of the screen to know what the characters are talking about. And unlike the other short films, what they are saying matters more than just for the plot.
セシルか。あ、待てよ。そういえばキャサリンも言ったっけか。あー、どうしてくれよ。でも答えは一つってかい。
でもあんなのに引っかかる女も気の毒っすよね。
ちげねえ。ハイツ、お前さんとこも確か娘だったな。と言ってもまだ10歳ぐらいか。
頼むよ。俺はそんなガキには興味ねえんだよ。
The ship suddenly receives a distress call from a dangerous part of space, but are forced to answer the call because of their code of conduct. They soon come across a massive space station centered around a spaceship graveyard that floats around it in its immense magnetic field. Two of the crew, Heinz and Miguel, make their way on board, where they quickly discover that this station is way more than what it seems.
Up until now, there really hasn't been a clear indication of what kind of story Magnetic Rose will be. Sure, it is a sci-fi story, but what kind of sci-fi story? Well, when the two go on board, it quickly becomes what it always was. A ghost story.
Slowly but surely, the two piece together who might have lorded over this opulent station as they come across a massive portrait of a finely dressed woman, who they find out is a celebrated opera soprano named Eva Friedel. But the questions keep piling up as it's soon made clear that nothing is real. The views of a pastoral landscape are nothing but holograms, and the laid out food and what appears to be the woman's wardrobe are fake as well.
Not only that, but the two are starting to see things.
Miguel, ever the woman chaser, keeps seeing Eva beckoning him, calling him her beloved Carlo, whereas Heinz is seeing something more personal. The deeper the two go into the ship, the more vivid and inviting the hallucinations become. All the while, the other two crew members delve into Ava's past, her promising inhaled voice having been lost, and the fate of her murdered fiancé, Carlo.
Eventually, Miguel becomes lost in the bowels of the ship, and soon, lost to reality altogether.
Though Miguel loses himself in the illusion, believing himself to actually be Carlo, Heinz still tries to hold himself together, even as Ava probes deeper into his head.
ずーっと家にいてほしいわよね。あなた。ね
えママジャム取って。
あーエミリー、またキュウリばっかり残して。
そんなの嘘だもん。
本当にもうどこにも行かないで。あなた。
Compare this to a similar plotline in a more contemporaneous story, Dead Space.
Yes, comparing game to film is not entirely one-to-one, but the story being told and the devices both use are very similar. Like Heinz, Isaac is also being tormented by the visions of his past, but the effect is different. Because it's a game, there is a more tangible feeling of terror and uncertainty because you as the player control and construct Isaac. Since he has no voice of his own in the game, and because he spends the majority of the run time faceless, he becomes less a character than as a vessel for the player to experience. You are expressly told what these visions are, and what has happened to Isaac to make him see said visions, for the purposes of a mind-controlling alien obelisk. With Heinz, his visions are personal and important only to him, not to the external force creating these visions.
I think by now most of you have figured out that Heinz's daughter is dead, since it's not like the film hasn't been hinting at it pretty hard.
From the scene where he witnesses a porcelain figurine fall from a table that couldn't be caught in time, we can figure that his daughter Emily fell in an accident, and when he witnesses her falling from the ceiling, it all but cements the notion.
I've talked about child death in fiction only once so far on Anime Abandoned, and that was in my Grave of the Fireflies review.
From the beginning, we know that both children die, so the movie winds up being a march towards an inevitable end. Didn't help matters that both children were coded less as characters and more audience proxies, so when tragedy happened, it felt like it had no diegetic reasoning behind it, thus it felt forced.
Diegesis, in a visual context like film, means relating to what the film holds true based on the perspective of the characters within it. For example, a film score is non-diegetic because we can hear it, but the characters in the movie cannot.
Likewise, the scene where Setsuko plays around in a montage meant to invoke sadness moments after her death has no diegetic reason for existing. It wasn't preempted by another character reminiscing about her. In fact, no other character is presented within this montage. Therefore, this can only exist for the purpose of the audience. It's emotional exposition. It tells us to be sad because it is sad. However, in Heinz's case, everything we have witnessed, he has witnessed, so his reaction informs our reaction.
Thus, when Heinz confronts what he thinks is Ava, we are invested in what's going on an emotional level.
カルロは永遠に生きるのよ。私と思い出の中で。
何？
わかるはずよ、あなたには。
こんなまやかしをが。なぜ受け入れない現実を？カルロは死んだんだ。
私が永遠にしたのよ、カルロを。
お前が？
思い出の中ならあの人が心変わりをすることもないわ。
A broken woman distraught from having her voice taken from her murders her fiancé when he simply stops loving her, and builds a place where she can pretend that nothing went wrong and wallow in her memories. Showing him the power of denial and lying to yourself, she finally shows him the night that Emily died and how inviting a lie can be if it means nothing happened to her.
And he nearly falls for it. But reality has a way of crashing down on you. The genius of this scene is that everything important to it has been well laid out beforehand.
Not only do we know that he had a daughter, but because his own coworkers and friends didn't even know she was dead, means that Heinz hasn't even opened up about it. Heck, even his wallet that holds the picture of Emily that broke him from enthrallment was established at the beginning when he uses it to prove that they were attempting the rescue in the first place. Nothing came out of nowhere. Everything was established using in-universe logic that is completely sound. It did everything to build up to this one climactic point, and it succeeded astoundingly.
From here, the film ends quickly, but not in an unsatisfying way.
Heinz discovers the computer that's making all of these illusions, but is unable to destroy it. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew are desperately trying to save the ship from being destroyed by the magnetic field and fire a breaching blast into the hull, blowing out Heinz into space, but it's too late. The ship is destroyed, the illusion stays, Miguel is still ensnared in Ava's memory, and we finally see that the real Ava has long since passed away. We end on Heinz slowly floating in the void, but still alive.
As the story unfolds, it becomes quite clear that the story was not going to have a happy ending. But it shouldn't. I know it sounds weird to want to have a somber ending to a story, but it'd be weird not to, because the story deserves it.
It deserves every bit of sympathy and emotional reaction that it garners from the audience because it took no easy way out and told itself masterfully. Would it be nearly as provocative as it is if it weren't also expertly animated and grand in its presentation? Probably not. But I do know that if it weren't as well written, paced, and told as it is, then it wouldn't be nearly this engrossing. It's not that Stink Bomb and Cannon Fodder had to be beautiful tragedies to be good stories, is that the story they were each telling had to mean more than just a vehicle for the visuals. Because even though an effect can be exciting and fun, a story...
Emily. Emily. Emily.
A story can be enrapturing. Well, if you stuck it out with me this far and you still haven't seen Memories, then hopefully I haven't ruined it for you, and you go out and see it as soon as possible, because there are simply not enough adjectives to properly describe how amazing this is. Hopefully you all won't get whiplash from our next episode, because we go from beautiful art to beautiful trash. Till next time.
Long live your Lord High Regent Sage! Long live Benetopia!